Hey everyone, welcome to our final session. Hopefully you've had an amazing day. We definitely have. We're really excited and appreciate everyone who's joined us today in all of the chat activity and the questions and the interactivity. Don't forget there is a Slack channel, so if you want to keep interacting, go in there, sign up. You can create your own channels for like things that you want to talk about. There's some generic ones in there right now. But you can create your own and just sort of start your own little subtopics. You want to talk about machine learning, start that and get some people in there and start engaging so that we can sort of keep this energy going long after the conference is over. So for our last session, I'm very excited to welcome Jenny Chang. She's a VP at PayPal. I've known Jenny for a long while. She was an investor in my company when I was a founder. So sorry again for losing your money, but I know you.
Worth every penny, don't worry.
Yay. Jenny's been doing this for quite some time. She had a few things and then was at Salesforce from 2002 when they were just around 200 employees for 9 years, and she ran practically everything. It was described to me that like the trains ran on time as long as Jenny was there, which I can totally believe because she definitely keeps the trains running. And then she went to Inside View and was a GM and then ran product, and now just like a little over a year ago, joined PayPal. She's also been a founder and an angel investor, so she's kind of the perfect person to wrap up the day with because she's seen things from a bunch of different angles. So welcome, Jenny.
Thank you. And I'm really excited. I was able to listen to a lot of the content today, and it's been a really great virtual conference. So congrats to all of you as well.
Hey, awesome team, the whole team. We're going to celebrate. They did so good. Okay, so I wanted to come back a little bit to some things we heard earlier today and just sort of talk about our takeaways and then dive into a few things that you and I think are interesting too. So in the second session with Arkway Harris from Slack, they talked about, she talked about how she had one-on-one meetings once a month that were just for career growth, which I always try to do that with my team, but I don't think I was that explicit about it. And I was wondering how you handle it.
Yeah, I think that was fabulous. And in fact, I will say that after I listened to her say that, I thought, my threshold is too low because I wasn't thinking a monthly basis, honestly. And I love that. And I love, whatever is the right cadence. Maybe it's quarterly, semi-annually, but it really does need to be a formal time you carve out because otherwise one-on-ones, obviously driven by, the direct report in terms of agenda can just go all over the place and can go from being project-based or asking for advice that's situational. And I think if you don't carve off that time as a manager to have that conversation, a year goes by and you realize you haven't had it. So I love that she does that.
Yeah. And she also talked a little bit about if there's a surprise in your performance review, which kind of ties into this, right? You failed them as a leader. I think it took me a while to sort of develop that feeling as a manager of like, oh, it's my responsibility. If you failed, I failed you. And to be really explicit about saying that, right? So I was wondering, like, as you've sort of gone from a manager to a manager of managers, how have you thought about that?
Yeah, and I completely agree. In fact, I say the exact same thing to my direct reports and the managers and my team as well, which is, you don't give feedback at the very end, right before maybe an annual performance review, and then, not expect your direct report to be surprised. That feedback should be constant. It should be both formal and informal, right? Project-based, et cetera. So absolutely agree with her advice. And she was so funny as she was delivering too. I love that.
Just be prepared for a stalker because I just want to keep you forever.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think for me personally, moving from that first line manager role to being a manager of managers was honestly the hardest part of my career path. And I think part of it is, when you're a first time manager, and you are very, very involved in everything that everyone is doing on your team. and you know what's going on. And if you're a control freak like I am, then moving to that next level, being one level abstracted from it and not having not being in the weeds and in all that detail and really getting to know everyone on your team. And now you are managing managers, and you may get to know some of the people on the team, but you don't know maybe everyone to that level and degree that you would as a first line manager. Was just a huge transition for me. And how do I make sure I empower my managers and I don't seagull them by, going around them and going straight to their direct reports? And how do I manage communication? I think that was actually one of the hardest ones for me, which is how am I very, very clear with my direct reports so that it doesn't become a telephone game and that the message actually, gets to everyone. It's consistent, it's clear. They hear it from me, they hear it from their manager, right? And that consistency in communication, whether it comes to priorities or how to handle things, I think it was the biggest learning curve for me as I moved kind of into that director level role. And that happened, a lot of that was at Salesforce. And so I think really we were, growing so fast. And so to be able to also do that at scale when we were bringing in massive amounts of people was just a huge, huge learning curve.
Yeah. There's another thing that they brought up. Well, no, I want to go back for a second. Tell me, okay, if you could know one thing from when you went from an individual contributor to a manager and then manager to manager of managers, what's that one thing you would go back and tell yourself, oh, this was the hard lesson, and if I just known it up front, I would have sucked a little bit less for a while?
I think it would be to ask for input from those first line managers. In my situation, I think I felt that I needed to know what to do or what the plan was going to be. And so I didn't solicit as much input as I should have. And again, because I had been that first line manager and I kind of presumed that I already knew that first level of information. And the world was changing so fast that in reality, I should have asked. I should have asked again. I should have gotten more input in that process, which I think you naturally would have done if you had come from the outside in. But because I was kind of growing up there in that process, I didn't do that until I think later. It probably took later for me to realize that I needed to ask for more input.
Yes. And then what about the manager of managers? Or that's sort of, yes.
Right. Sorry, that was the manager of managers, the example that I was talking about.
I know. It's a long day. All right. So one of the things that came up a couple of times today was keeping a list of your accomplishments, which I've never done. And I think we were talking earlier, and you've never done. But I think we should kind of circle back to this as a thing that one of the big takeaways of something that people could take away and sort of start doing tomorrow. But have you ever done anything at all like that, or do you do it with your team?
I mean, for better or worse, I think we have a tendency to do that when we're thinking about our next job, right? And so, how do I update my resume, LinkedIn profile, fill in the blank? So I think that's generally when we start thinking and being more reflective about what we've done or what we've accomplished. Or I think to the other point our Kay mentioned, which is, at that point where we're trying to justify a promotion, and at that point it's probably too late. So I loved her point about using it, about kind of advocating and marketing yourself constantly. And, really just using it even as a form to share with your manager and remind him or her all the things you're doing. I can tell you again, from past experience, I have had to do that. And I've been very fortunate to have really great peers who would run around and remind people, and don't forget, Jenny did that, and Jenny owned that and was part of that. And so I was very lucky to have a lot of champions within my career. I
think it's easy to forget too, that all the awesome things that you did, right? Because you're always just kind of in the thick of whatever's going on. So I'm not even sure I could go back and like out, it's the same thing that you're saying, right? You go to update your LinkedIn and you have to go ask your friends, like, or your coworkers, like, what did I do here? Yeah. Right. Because they have a much better sort of view of that. But yeah, keeping track. And I like how Arkway said it too, of like, oh, well, I just keep a track of it for myself too. I'm not really doing it for anything else. I'm just sort of doing a thing at the end of the week of like what I did this week, which I think is a good sort of way to keep things in check for yourself too. So big takeaway there, I think. So one thing that I wanted to get into, because I think is interesting, and we were talking about it a little bit before we went on camera, but we know that when we're negotiating, like we need sort of someone else to negotiate on behalf, right? Like I'm great at negotiating deals, except when they're for myself. And so I know that, and I have, a person who I think would negotiate similar to how I would, and they're going to help me come in and sort of negotiate my next job offer. Like that's my sort of workaround, and just recognizing that I suck with that. But I think what's interesting now that we don't talk about as much is, what if you're the female hiring manager and you know that women don't negotiate? Like, how are we going to navigate that?
I think it's a really great question. And, I think it has to be done obviously very carefully. And I think as a hiring manager, my philosophy has always been to put my best offer forward. From the beginning, regardless of, gender or anything else. And so it's really trying to take into account what I think this person deserves coming in, not based on what they made at their last company. Of course, I think in a lot of negotiations, that's actually where it starts, which is the problem.
Right.
If you're starting from a deficit and then you're trying to negotiate from a deficit, you're in trouble. And so I think really starting from the point of, not what have I made in the past or what was my total comp in the past, but really thinking about, coming in and making sure that the offer that as a hiring manager, you're giving that person is fair and equitable based on the people who are already there in-house.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's where, I know I look at things like we have comp ratios at PayPal. So making sure that people are within the right comp ratios and that we're looking at kind of where they would fit within the existing pool is something that I use. But I think it's a really, really good point. And I don't know if you have any tips and tools, but as a hiring manager, that is a really tricky line to walk.
Yeah, I mean, I think, your starting point is one that people should definitely be thinking about. Another thing I read recently, and I can't say that it's true because sometimes I make things up, but I'm pretty sure I read that in California that employers are, as of the beginning of the year, there was a change and they're no longer allowed to ask you what your comp was before. And that if you ask for the pay range for a particular role, they are required to provide it, which I think, I don't know if that's being rolled out nationally in any way, but I think that's a way to sort of maybe, another strategy is if you're outside of California, you just don't ask what they made before because you're not hiring them to do their last job, right? You're hiring them to do this job.
And I think my tip for the people coming into that is hiring managers, whether or not they intend to, are probably trying to get to the same answer by asking you, what's the minimum that you would expect to make in this role, right? And so I think some of the advice there is really just be very, very clear that there are questions that you ask that you really don't have to answer, or you can answer in a very different way.
Right.
And so say, well, this is what I expect to make. And you can give a much broader, bigger, higher range than answering a question like that. So I think we have to be very aware of those type of questions, which aren't technically legal in California, but they walk that gray line. And
right. Yeah. Well, we're going to get a lot more savvy about this, and I have faith and I have hope that we're going to get on the other side of it. And I don't say that very often, so it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, and I can tell you just even from my own personal experience, which is go ask other people, in similar roles at other companies, who might be more open and willing to tell you or give you a range on what they think you should be making, for that job at that level. And don't rely on the HR person or the recruiter to tell you, hey, this is a fair and, a fair offer for you. Go do some research and bring to the table what else is possible.
Absolutely. So we have a few more questions to talk about, but if you guys have takeaways from today and you have questions, or if there's just something like we could talk about this a little bit more, like definitely ask the question below and then check it out and vote up the ones that you most want to answer. And then we'll come back to those in a few minutes. So I think the hardest thing for me sort of transitioning kind of from a manager to a leader was learning a lot about myself and sort of this trial by fire. And certainly as a founder, like I did not think in my 40s I was going to be like, oh, wow, I did not know that about myself, like a lot. And then also, when you're in a senior leader role and thinking about it, and I think one of the things that I realized was that I just need to own my weaknesses and that it's fine. And that certainly in my 40s, we can assume that I'm never going to be patient, right? I'm never going to be the person who likes doing the minutia, right? There's just there are things that I've sort of just accepted.
Yeah.
Right? And then you also have sort of the I don't know, privilege is the right word, but as you're hiring, right, you know how to hire for your weaknesses. But do you have advice or ideas on sort of how you develop that awareness, right? What are the things that go wrong, and how did you sort of figure out your weaknesses?
Well, I think one is, taking the time to ask for feedback, and ask for feedback from your peers, your direct reports, and even your good friends. The people around you who have gotten to know you pick up on things that you don't even realize you do. When I started in my career early on at Deloitte Consulting, I had a senior manager and friend say to me, Jenny, when you say interesting, you mean not good. And when you say funny, it isn't funny. And I didn't even realize I did that. And then she told me, and it would be really helpful when we're sitting in meetings with customers and they say something that you don't agree, that you don't roll your eyes at them. And I realized okay, I have no poker face when it comes to that, right? And I've tried really hard to develop it. And I think my current directs would tell you too that I have no poker face. So I think to your point, which is, at some point we should take that feedback. We should definitely try to improve and adjust. But we also should be very authentic, to ourselves, and understand that there are some things that are not quite ever going to go away. And so how do we balance that out with either direct reports or other people around us who can complement and those skills, or what do we do essentially to focus on at least leveraging those as strengths whenever we can? So you being impatient, for example, Gretchen, is a huge strength in most of the things you do.
Well, it certainly moves things faster, but it doesn't make me lots of friends. Yeah. Okay. So another thing we were talking about a little bit more. So I think that it's circling back to a little bit about what we were talking about earlier, but when you are a manager of managers, it's sort of that long-term planning muscle that you have to do, right? And figuring out how to be involved, but how do you set those goals and have the metrics that make sure that everyone's sort of going in the right direction, whether you're there or not, right? I always think of it like I'm the air traffic controller and everyone else is the pilot of their airplane. And so we agree on a flight plan, and then you keep me informed. And if you don't keep me informed, then something's going to crash, and that would suck. Right. But if you need something along the way, if you're like, oh, we need to make an emergency thing, I'm like, I'll call up that airport and set it up for you. Right. So I think of it that way. But it's figuring out the metrics to that flight plan. Right. What are we measuring against? What are our key performance indicator kind of things, where I love how I say kind of things because I'm a startup person. But that sort of way of looking at things, like I think it doesn't feel like there's a rule book for that. It feels like you sort of make it up as you go along, but maybe there is. Maybe you have advice.
No, I generally agree with you. I think the way I think about it is I try to be really clear about what we're trying to achieve. And even if we're not sure what the exact metrics are, take a stab at putting something out there that is aggressive. And as long as a leader, you're very clear, like, I understand this is a really aggressive goal. So I can tell you right now, one of the things we're thinking about at PayPal, my organization, is, customer satisfaction, right? How do we think about NPS and CSAT? And, what I'd love to do is, make sure we have a very, very aggressive goal related to that. And then let's put together a plan to get there. And I'm really clear with my team, which is we understand it's an aggressive goal and we may not be able to achieve it this year, and that's okay. But, if you don't shoot for the moon,
right.
Are we really going to be happy with anything less? And so I think as that, manager of managers, as that leader, I think just being really clear on, can we all align to this goal? Do we all align to a metric? And then how do we want to measure and check in? And I think being, again, very clear, like, is that metric going to move? Are we willing to shift it? And what is the time boxing we're going to do to get there? So should we evaluate it every quarter? And let's just be really clear, that metric, that goal is never moving. The goalpost is not moving. Or in certain situations, you're going to say, you know what? We've learned something new. Let's move the goalpost because it no longer makes sense, right? So I think that's really how I try to lead and kind of manage. And again, from my earlier learnings, I ask for a lot of help and input.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, as women, I think we're much better at that. So that's sort of our superpower, right? Just constantly being like, did that suck? Okay, so we have a few questions. And if we get through these, then I want to come back and talk about one more thing. So our most popular question is, how do you progress if you ask for new stretch work, but company projects don't align? So without experience, getting an opportunity in a new company is hard.
I think one of the ways to think about it is to look for opportunities that are maybe kind of adjacent to what your group is doing or even what your company is doing. So can you help out with an opportunity with a social, essentially innovation or a not-for-profit, looking for opportunities like that. So you can kind of bring that back and say, here's an example where I was able to do this. And if you can tie it into something that your company in particular might be interested in or be able to get behind and show that you're able to do it. Because I think it's that combination of saying, I'm ready for that opportunity and I want to show you that I can handle that opportunity, even if I don't have that opportunity right in front of me as my day-to-day job.
Yeah. And I think also proving to yourself that you can do it, right? I think that's where, if you go and you get that experience, then you can come back with so much more confidence and just be like, look, I know I can do this. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you I can. And I think that creates a lot more, inspires probably more confidence in the person that you're asking to. Okay, one more question and then I want to come back. So what metrics can or should we use to prove that an offer is not up to par with what we feel we deserve instead of just stating an expected salary?
What proof? The question was what proof? Sorry.
Yeah, like used to prove it. I mean, I think, part of that is like there are, LinkedIn gives ranges and there's other sites that give ranges, right? But I think if you have more suggestions on that.
Yeah, I think that's valid. I think you can look at some third parties, Glassdoor, salary.com, whatever there is out there. Obviously another easy one is, go look and get a competitive offer. See what else is out there. If you don't feel like your offer is on par or fair, I think to go back and negotiate, right? And set an expectation on what you would like to see is is a good thing. And I was sharing a story earlier with Gretchen around negotiating. And in one of my past roles, one of my girlfriends was just telling me, she uses me as an example all the time because I got an offer and I was talking to her about it. And I said, what do you think I should negotiate in this offer? And she said to me, I think you should negotiate everything. And I said, you're completely right. And I went in there and negotiated everything. And she says, I always use you as the example. If you got everything but one thing, and the one thing they couldn't give you was something that was a corporate policy. And then we still negotiated a workaround to that corporate policy. Mm-hmm. So I think, if you don't think you're getting the kind of the right salary or the right package, obviously go back and negotiate for what you think is fair. If they're not willing to negotiate, that also says a lot about the company. Or, again, go get a competitive offer. That's another way to kind of prove you've got a bird in hand versus sometimes third-party sites and third-party data won't necessarily push or make a change the way another offer in hand would.
Yeah, I think where I struggle with that, and I don't think there is a solution, but I'll just leave an open question. At the smaller companies, at the earlier stage companies, like there just isn't a lot of comp, right? Like things to look at. There's not a lot of data available. Titles are weird. And so if someone has suggestions on that, send it in, because I think that's sort of where we're still struggle a lot, right? When you get into a large organization and, titles there's at least some level of parity, I think you get a little bit more clarity on it. Okay, so one more question, maybe two. So one was for someone who hasn't done a great job of communicating their accomplishments or responsibilities in a company, and is undervalued, what should they do to sort of reset that? Like, how do you sort of start from where you are?
Well, I think to the point that Gretchen and I were saying, which is, start writing everything down, and look for champions to help you essentially amplify the message of what you've done. Those could be, again, peers. That could be ideally your manager. Go back and actually start promoting the things you've done, and then make that a part of your go forward plan too. I think that would be absolutely important, which is don't give up on all the stuff that you've done so far, but definitely make sure it becomes a more integrated process of what you do going forward.
So Jenny, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. Thank you for your patience with the few blips that we had. Thank you to all of our speakers who took the time to share everything. These sessions will be available very soon, like right after this shuts down. And we'll also be sharing out an attendee survey, get your feedback, and sharing these videos out in blog posts and things in the very near future. So thank you again, everyone, on behalf of Angie Shakrutha, Amy, and Amanda. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Bye-bye.